Hi, Damien. Good to have you back in Uncommon Sense Studio with me today.
Thank you very much.
So tell me, what's inspired you to join me today, and what are we going to talk about?
So I wanted to touch on a subject that relates to a question I get asked quite often, especially at green belt level, sometimes even at yellow belt level, which concerns this fear, anxiety, or maybe sometimes reality of people uh, uh, that feel they're going to be, or they may be unable to, once they've gotten to the stage where they have a solution or solutions, that they won't be able to implement them, or that their business is going to somehow put the blockers on it and
Right.
not see it through. So, well, I thought I just want to talk about how to maybe some strategies of perhaps how to think about handling that in various scenarios.
Okay. And I mean, because the reality is that, of course, that does sometimes happen, and we don't
Yeah,
plan. No one plans for that to happen. No one spends the time on doing all the work and then plan to do nothing with it at the end.
indeed. Yeah,
Um, but for lots of reasons, and I've talked to lots of people who said we just couldn't. Things changed and we
right.
just couldn't complete this.
Yeah,
So I think that this is a really interesting topic because we talk a lot about, you know, what do you learn from failing sometimes, not
yeah,
succeeding.
indeed.
So what are your thoughts on this then?
So I've got quite a few, and some of it's based on advice, and of course, some of it's based on people actually reaching that point and then realizing that's what's happening. So
Yeah.
there's kind of different situations. I think the first thing I'd say is it's not something I would be overly concerned with when I'm very early on in a project.
Hmm.
And I'd say that because the if you're following our improvement cycle, if you're following DMAIC, if you're more familiar with that, or even if you're going into a Kaizen event, um, you shouldn't know what the solution is at that stage anyway. So worrying about whether it's implementable or not is an unknown. It's an acceptable unknown at the start of a project. So that's something that we just have to be prepared for. We might have some theories, that's fine, but they often turn out to be quite different solutions by the time we've really been out there and understand what's actually causing the issue. So I think that's the first bit of advice is if it's something that you're panicking about when you're early on in the early stages, I wouldn't worry about it because the solution, the real solution, by the time we get there, could be completely different.
Yes.
Um, that's the first bit of advice. Um, I think the second bit of advice is all the way through a project. There's lots and lots of things that will become discovered. There's lots and lots of new learning that will happen, and there's an awful lot of lower level, smaller solutions that you're going to discover. And if so, let's say you can't solve the big problem, the thing that you set out to do in the first place, because the solution for some reason is getting rejected. There's still likely going to be an awful lot of smaller things you can still give the business as a benefit, although it might not add up to the sum of what you intended to do. It's nonetheless still beneficial and improvement, and therefore the whole project hasn't been a complete waste of time. So, I think making note of what that those are as you go through is going to be really important in that
Yeah.
in that handover stage.
I mean, that whole process, whether you're doing a yellow belt type project or a green belt, that whole process of identifying some quick wins can actually add up to not
Oh
only
yeah.
an interesting shift in performance, but a great sense of satisfaction.
Oh yeah, indeed, absolutely, and we've seen actually with client work we've done, sometimes the quick wins can add up to significant,
Yes.
beneficial benefits to the business. Um, but then I think one of the main talking points on this is really the learning that you can still take, right? So if you reach this point, and it genuinely is the case that it we can't implement this solution that we've found, that we've tested and verified. I'm making the assumption we've tested it, we've verified it, we know it's going to work at least with a small scale trial that we've done. That should always be doable. But the full blown implementation, for whatever reason, the blockers are in, and that could be because of financial reasons. The solution might be a lot more expensive than we anticipated, and the way budget cycles work, it's just not in this year's budget. That can still often sometimes be tweaked, but it could be a big blocker. That's understandable. It could be like you say, that if the project is dragged on too long, that circumstances have changed, which might mean that the solution is now not necessary. Maybe the problem's going to go away naturally because of some other change in the business, and therefore we don't
Yeah.
need to do it anymore. So that's another reason why we talk about, these projects not going on really any more than sort of 6 months. 3 to 6 months is an ideal sort of
Mm.
time frame for a typical greenbelt project. But it's still, if you do reach that point and it's a genuine blocker, I think it's still a great opportunity for the organization to sit back and reflect on what has been the learning from this. And there's probably a couple of points you could take there. So one could be, you know, did we have the right kind of stakeholder engagement from the get-go? Because if it's being blocked because of a stakeholder issue, like someone saying, I wasn't aware of this change and I'm not in for it, it's not a budget issue, it's just a I don't want to do it
Mm.
kind of thing. That's a stakeholder issue. That's something that really shouldn't happen or can be avoidable if we've engaged the right people at the right time, much earlier in the project. So not waiting until we get to the solution and then knocking
Yes.
on doors and saying, are you up for this? Because that's the classic how to create resistance to change, the shock factor. So if we're engaging a broader audience of stakeholders from the beginning, when we're just outlining what the problem is and saying we're looking into it, those people get the learning as we go through. They get the understanding and the nuances of what the issue is as we go through the whole journey. So that by the time we get to the point where we're even investigating solutions, they're probably involved in that with us,
Yeah.
or they're certainly on board with it. And it's less of a shock factor. They're more likely to be along with the idea because they've seen the compelling evidence for, they understand the business case of why we're doing it, and they've understood the root causes, and therefore it's not such a surprise about why we've said that something now needs to be different.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mentioned.
So the other point is that on the learning point is the reason for the resistance to the solution because the original problem wasn't such an important problem in the first place. Now, I've got to caveat this with the recommendations we give to people for their very first project. We often say, pick something that's actually quite small and doable. So we want you to get to the end. We want you to deliver something, even if
Mm.
it's not, huge benefits. But for other projects, once you've gotten around that, we usually are suggesting that you're tackling something that's got a strategic link. So
Yes.
it's linking back to the organization's strategic objectives. The organization's already set its course. It knows it wants to go this direction. And I think a failure to do that well could be another root cause of why you meet resistance when you get into the point of implementation, because you're trying to solve a problem that either the business just doesn't recognize, or it does recognize it, but it's way lower down on the
Yes.
register of priority than some of the other issues it's got. And that really circles right back to the very first steps of the project, where we're saying what problems are we even selecting to work on. Now, often green belts people at the green belt level are charged with the task of doing this themselves, and I would really uh, it, want to encourage our audience, particularly those in a more senior position, to take more proactive activity on this front. You're likely to have more of a broader view of the organization. You can see the bigger picture view. You've got probably a much clearer idea about what the key priorities are, for this year, next year, and the next 5 years. The problem statements should be virtually writing themselves. Greenbelt should then ideally be handed some of these problem statements to then go off and build the team up around it and add some detail and maybe scope it appropriately. But I don't think it's right that we expect greenbelts to somehow go back into their organizations and figure out these strategic imperatives.
Mm.
So the learning, back to the learning point, is if we keep getting projects that fail at the implementation stage, the solution stage, is that just a reflection on the leadership's commitment in the first place?
Ultimately. Okay, great. So I think the learning here is, of course, I think there's some good points, and you make a great point, which is, let's not worry about some of these things at the beginning in terms of worrying that this will all go wrong, because we do know that along the way we will achieve great things, even through quick wins, streamlining, standardizing processes.
Yeah.
But if you've done the work well up front and set up the project well, you've got the right stakeholders and the right sponsors, then you've got a much better chance of avoiding the traps of not being on the corporate radar, not being on the strategic priority list, and therefore much more likely to get over the line.
Yeah, I think that's a nice, lovely summary. Yeah,
Thank you very much, Damian.
there is. There was one more bit of advice I could squeeze in. It's a technique I really perfected when through running Kaizen events, and it was this just mindset of creativity over capital, as we used to call it. In other words, what can we do? So still, you might still have it. So when you're at the solution generation stage, you might generate some solutions that are big, expensive, going to take a long time. And straight away, it might be there might be some onus on the team there to go, oh, hang on a minute. We know that that's going to be a real challenge for the business to swallow, even to the point where we just don't even bother going forward with it because we know it's going to get rejected. So why don't we explore alternatives that are effectively quicker and cheaper?
Mm,
And it might not be quite as good as the full-blown expensive thing, but if it still does 50% of the job, 25% of the job, we still get to land something.
yes.
And I think that's a great bit of advice, really, because no organizations carry around a spare budget of cash just in case someone gets a great idea. So if you can, yeah, think of that, think of what are the alternate versions of the same idea, but those that are within our grasp that we can,
Mm.
have self-control of. We're not reliant on externals or mega budgets and that kind of thing. You're far more likely to have solutions that you can see through the implementation stage much easier.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Damien. Really helpful.
Thank you very much.